Hey everyone, it's Naomi Wolf of Daily Cloud, and I'm beyond honored and delighted to be here with Professor Mark Crispin Miller. Dr. Miller, welcome.
Great to be with you in this virtual way.
It is so great. Mark Crispin Miller is one of the real visionaries of our time. He's author of numerous books, including being a professor of media studies at NYU. He wrote Fold Again, which is one of the first books to sound the alarm about the corruption of our voting system. He also wrote the Bush Dyslexicon. He is editing the Forbidden Bookshelf series, and for a long time he hosted and convened fantastic author events at the independent bookstore in Lower Manhattan, McNally Jackson. So an incredibly distinguished commentator, visionary, civil libertarian, fierce critic of authoritarianism. We have this shared karma of being kind of 7 years ahead of conventional wisdom. He's probably 10 years ahead of conventional wisdom. So he has to take the kind of conspiracy theory nonsense, attacks, hostility, brutal institutional assaults before everyone realizes that in fact he was right all along, which always happens. And I just want to really sincerely welcome you, and I'll stop fangirling, but I just want to say you've been ever since the end of America, you were a staunch supporter of my work to inform people about threats to democracy, very much inspired by your work and other visionaries. And you've also been someone I really, look up to and draw strength from as an example of one of these kind of, you will never give in, accommodate to nonsense, mediate, modify your voice if civil liberties are at stake. So welcome with such enthusiasm. Let's just get started. Tell me about your lawsuit.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, by the way. And I want to add gratuitously that I'm a great admirer of your book, Outrages, which is on a completely different subject, although tangentially related, of course. I wanted to be with you and reach your audience in order to further spread the word about my ordeal at NYU. It's a struggle that I think is a flashpoint in the larger fight for academic freedom and free speech. So if you'll indulge me, I'll give you the background, which is, it's quite a story. So although detailed, it'll be worth every moment, I think.
I'm sure.
I teach a course on propaganda at NYU. I've taught it for at least 20 years, at least twice a year. It's always been very heavily enrolled, waitlisted. Students really love it. Although it is a challenging course. It is difficult in a certain way that most other courses aren't, because I teach propaganda, not as a remote, alien phenomenon. People tend to think when they hear the word propaganda, or have tended to think, that it's something the Nazis did and something the Bolsheviks did, and maybe something that happened in World War I. But often the course is taught in a way that distances us from propaganda, which is all pervasive. And as we've been witnessing over the last year or so, astoundingly successful if done right. So I spell all this out at the beginning of every semester, and I make the point that if you make the intellectual and emotional effort to study propaganda in real time, thoroughly and impartially, you have to be prepared to move out of your comfort zone. Because, everybody can spot propaganda they don't agree with. Right? So you ask a liberal, so what's an example of propaganda?
Fox News.
Fox News, it's Fox News, Rush Limbaugh, Breitbart, ick, bad. You ask a conservative, what's propaganda? They'll say MSNBC, Well, they're both right. Those are propaganda organs. But what's significant about that is that they are blind to the propaganda that pushes their own buttons, okay? So I tell the class, we're going to be talking about a lot of things. I myself have often had to modify my views when I've studied propaganda drives. That's evidence of a growing mind.
Right.
So you're going to be prepared. You're going to have to be prepared maybe to have some difficulties in your personal life as you study these things. Your roommates, your friends, your family. And indeed, as the semester progresses, many of them will say, I brought this up at home and I heard this and I heard that. It's daunting. It's challenging. And I also say, I want to make this last point about the caveats and warnings that I give at the beginning. I said, you're going to hear me say some things that might strike you as outrageous, or rather, I'm going to point to evidence to bolster the notion that this actually happened or that actually happened. I want you throughout this semester not to believe a single word I say. This is a mantra of mine. Don't believe me.
Right.
If you're shocked by something, look into it.
Right.
Okay? Look into it. And then come back and tell me if I'm wrong. And if I'm wrong, I'll correct my position. But if I'm right, then you've learned something. All right. I say all this.
I mean, I'm just going to jump in to say this is breaking my heart, even as a preamble, because you've basically had to give a lengthy disclaimer for the educational experience.
Well, that's
you are
true.
about to be exposed to new ideas. Let me, provide you with a million disclaimers. I mean, the fact that you as a professor at a prestigious university have to even warn people that they might learn something and that they don't already know that learning things can be unsettling and destabilizing. And that's part of a key part of a liberal arts education is really tragic. But please go on.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. That's so true. One shouldn't have to say these things, but one does. It's a little bit like a trigger warning, but my classroom is a safe space of a particular kind. I'll get back to that.
I don't think any classroom should be an intellectual safe space, but that's me. And
but when I say that, Naomi, I mean that you are free to express any view you want in here. Nobody's going to call you a hater, etc.
I can't believe that even students have to worry about that now. We used to just be told you can express any view,
Right.
Anyway, go ahead, please.
Well, sure. All right. Well, my story kind of poignantly illustrates the truth of what you're saying. So this last fall, I began the course as usual, but this was the first time I was beginning the course remotely.
Mm-hmm.
And I made the point, we will talk about the Nazis, we will talk about the Russians, etc., but we're going to focus mainly on propaganda that's either ongoing now or very recent.
Mm-hmm.
For example, look at the way we're meeting.
Right.
We're meeting in this unnatural way, which is a very poor substitute for the real thing.
That's right.
Why are we meeting this way? Well, because of the COVID crisis. And the COVID crisis itself has entailed a whole multitude of propaganda narratives that sort of intertwine with each other. Mm-hmm. For example, we could study the mask mandates. You may be interested to know that all the randomized controlled studies done of masking by healthcare professionals over the last 15 years or so, I said that there were 8. There were actually more I didn't know of. All those studies, and those kinds of studies, the most rigorous scientific studies, have found that masks are ineffective as barriers against transmission of respiratory viruses. Right. They don't really work. Right. I encourage you to read those. Mm-hmm. I also encourage you to read more recent studies finding otherwise. Mm-hmm. So you should read both sides. And I gave them some tips. I mean, they're laypersons like myself. We're not scientists. Mm-hmm. I said, there are ways you can assess the soundness of a scientific study, even as a layperson. For example, you can look for scientific reviews online because they are available. Mm-hmm. You should also take note of what school, what university the study was conducted at, and then see if it has financial arrangements with big pharma.
All great advice for basic research at a time like this.
Yeah. The Gates Foundation, right?
Yeah, okay. For instance. Yes.
Okay, so I said all this, And then the following week, or possibly 2 weeks later, we were joined by a late arrival to the course, a young woman who seemed very eager to take it. And I always let people in if there's room. And I guess there's always room on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
So she joined us. And the first day she was there, this is a kind of a side note, which I hope we can get back to. We were discussing Edward Bernays' classic Propaganda from 1928. And she pushed her button or raised her hand or whatever this Zoom equivalent is. And I said, yeah. And she said, well, I think this is a work of white supremacy. I said, well, that's interesting. For example, and she thought, and she couldn't come up with an example. So I, launched into a little lecturette about the necessity of not over-focusing on particular things, because propaganda always focuses on only one thing.
Right.
That's what it does. This book came out in 1928, at which time eugenics was a very influential intellectual movement.
Right.
And that entailed, and especially in the 20s, a lot of talk about getting rid of the unfit across the board.
Right.
So
right.
Margaret Sanger, for example, saw Planned Parenthood as a crucial eugenics instrument.
Right.
And she was concerned about the Negro problem. That's true.
Right.
But she had her sights on all the unfit, Appalachian whites and immigrants.
Our grandparents.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I said that, and I could see she looked kind of nettled, right? The second,
you weren't saying it wasn't a work of white supremacy. You were saying it was white supremacist in a context of eugenics that included hate for a lot of undesirables.
Well, yeah, I wasn't even saying that, because none of that comes up in the book. I mean, it doesn't even touch on any of that. But I just said, I'm trying to make this into a teaching moment. I suggested
mm-hmm.
that one might broaden one's view. Okay.
Understood.
That's all.
You're a professor. You're allowed to say that.
I think I am. I have been.
Mm-hmm.
And I did.
Right.
The next day she was there, the mask discussion resumed. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it was one student in particular had found an attack article in Psychology Today about a compilation of randomized controlled studies that had been put together by Denis Rancourt. This is a very eminent French Canadian physicist.
Right.
And he did this great compilation, I think, of 7 such studies, and I had recommended it to them. And one of the students, instead of reading the studies, had gone to Google, found an attack piece. It was full of, deceptive, misleading points, misrepresentations, and he kept referring to that. And I said, well, you can't jump to Google and look for something to discredit work that you haven't read. So
that's also basic good scholarship.
Yes.
Scholarship.
And let me say that this other student is one of my, smartest students, and he did this throughout the semester. It was an interesting exchange, always cordial. All right. This is a Thursday.
All right.
And a few days later, my department chair calls me up and says, did you tell the students in your class not to wear masks? I said, no, I didn't say any such thing. In fact, I had said that first day, I am not telling you not to wear masks. Okay, I was pointed about that because NYU has a draconian rule on this, and I certainly wasn't telling them how to behave. I said, this is an intellectual exercise. That's all it is. Okay. So I told him this. And he said, well, I better tell the COVID star chamber or whatever they call it. I have to let them know. I said, all right. And I think he was the one who told me that a student had taken to Twitter to complain about my class. And indeed, this student who joined late, first she filed a bias report against me. She called the bias hotline, and they were unhelpful to her.
Right.
They said, we can't punish him for something he said in the class, which was, thank God for some sanity. So this just incensed her, and she took to Twitter and said that NYU should fire me for, how did she put it, an excessive amount of skepticism around healthcare professionals.
Wow.
All right.
Wow. I mean, but it's Twitter. She's allowed to say whatever she wants to say on
Of
Twitter.
course she's allowed to. All right. That was unsettling, but that in itself was not that big a deal.
Right.
I mean, usually students bring up their objections in class, and she should have done that, I think.
I agree.
But instead, she did what she did. All right, but what happened next is what was unacceptable to me and can't be defended on the grounds of free speech.
Right.
My department chair tweeted his thanks to her. And remember, she had asked that I be relieved of my duties.
Oh, my God.
And he said, this is a verbatim quote, and that tweet is still up, by the way.
Oh my God.
We as a department have made this a priority and are discussing next steps.
Oh, my God. Before he even talked to you or called you in or said, we need
Evidently.
to discuss this.
Okay, but it gets much better or
Oh
worse,
my
depending on your
God.
point of view. As a narrative, it gets better.
Oh, my
So-
God. And this is the media studies department or history
Yeah.
and studies? Media
Well, it was Neil Postman's department, and as such, it was primarily focused on media. It is grown enormously since Neil's death and become more inchoate. It's kind of a department of, well,
cultural studies? What's the name of it?
Media, culture, and communication.
Okay.
So that's like everything, the department of everything.
Right,
A
right.
strong emphasis on social justice.
And do you mind telling me who the department chair is?
Well, yeah, I don't mind because it's still up. I'm not going to identify the student. His name is Rod Benson, and we had always been friends, so that made this even more astonishing.
That is really shocking.
But then
Happened.
the next day, the dean and the doctor who advises NYU on their COVID rules, which again are draconian and have led to various lawsuits, emailed my other students directly without putting me on copy.
Oh my God.
And said, basically implied strongly that I had given them dangerous misinformation.
Oh my God.
And providing links to authoritative studies available at the CDC website. Studies which, by the way, let me remind your audience, I had already asked them to read.
Right.
I, however, did not tell them what to think, but
Right.
these administrators did. Okay.
Well, you were, these are two totally separate things. You weren't saying take off your masks and breathe in each other's faces if you're symptomatic in closed spaces. You were telling them how to engage in research around, in this case, a public health issue. This is shocking that these administrators and a scientist have merged these two as if they are the same thing. And this is the most dangerous thing in a democracy, when words become weaponized, when ideas become, oh, you can kill someone with that idea of how to do proper research. Extraordinary. Please go on. I'm shocked.
Well, let me note, I mean, I already implied this, that neither of them asked me anything about this.
Unbelievable.
Right? So based on a student's over-the-top tweet, and it wasn't just one tweet, Naomi, it was a stream of tweets vilifying me, providing screenshots from my website, News from Underground, you know, through which I share important information that is taboo.
But is also outside of the classroom, and you're free to do it. Because
it has nothing to do with my teaching.
Please go on. Then what happened? Unbelievable.
Okay. So the next day, this is strike 3 against me. My chair called me and urged me, for the good of the department, to cancel a propaganda course for this semester, this spring.
No.
Yeah.
Oh my God! For the good of the department?
Yeah. I asked him what he meant by that, and he said, "Well, you know, your film course, which I also teach annually, has a lot of students enrolled, and it'll be good for our numbers." The problem with that rationale is that both the propaganda and film courses have the same limit of 24 students, and they're both full. So this was a transparently spurious reason for asking me to stop teaching the course.
And how far into the semester were you? How many classes had you taught?
When this happened?
Yes.
Well, this was late September.
So there were kids were already enrolled. They'd chosen it.
Oh, yeah. Let me be clear. He's talking about the spring semester.
The spring semester to just not
which
teach
is
it.
this semester.
Unbelievable.
Okay.
Yes, I understand.
So,
Okay.
so if I'm on medical leave, I have chronic Lyme disease,
Oh, yes. I'm
and
sorry.
of course the stress of all this has not made it easier to recover.
Clearly not. So what did, I mean, when you challenged him for publicly announcing to the world that your own department was pursuing letting you go for engaging in First Amendment and academically protected speech, what did he say? I assume you brought that up.
Well, I asked him about this, so of course I was troubled by it. I asked him to take the tweet down,
Yeah.
and he was strangely insistent that he could not do that. And he said, I just wanted her to feel that she'd been heard, which is very disingenuous. I mean, if he wanted to make her feel heard, he could have said, well, thank you
Right.
for your opinion.
Right. Or had a conference or exactly.
So this really shocked and angered me.
As it should.
And I, with the help of some friends, like Mickey Huff at Project Censored and others, drafted a petition that's up at change.org, and your audience can find it. Mm-hmm. Basically doing nothing more than urging NYU to respect my academic freedom, but couching it in terms of a much wider struggle. That I'm not only doing this for my own sake, but really in the name of all those professors, scientists, doctors, activists, whistleblowers who have been gagged or persecuted for their dissidence, and not just lately, but for decades. Mm-hmm. So it was a sweeping demand that NYU set a good example for other universities by backing off and letting me teach my course, as usual. All right. So that went up in late September. And a lot of eminent people have signed it, I'm very pleased to say. So there's around 32,000 signatories worldwide. Now, this is where it gets even more bizarre. Oh my God. A month after this, the majority of my department colleagues sent the dean a letter demanding that he order an expedited review of my conduct, arguing that, they believe in academic freedom, which is something they always say. But if a professor's behavior is egregious in certain ways, then that nullifies his academic freedom. And they referred to the faculty handbook, which I think is supposed to refer to people who, raped somebody or, called somebody an N-word or, something really horrible like that. And they went beyond the accusations in the students' tweets. I mean, they said I discouraged students from wearing masks and I intimidated those who do wear them, which is a complete falsehood.
How can you even do that on a Zoom call?
Exactly. Yeah, you're quite right. Nobody was wearing a mask at the time.
You intimidated those who wore masks? Do you even see them on a Zoom call wearing a mask? I don't even understand the context for that.
Naomi, the whole letter, well, I'll make clear how deranged it is. They went on, they went beyond my mask heresy to a really slanderous indictment of my behavior as a professor overall.
Okay.
They accused me of explicit hate speech, attacking students and others in our community.
Physically attacking or verbally attacking?
Well, verbally, I suppose they would say, because, language is a weapon after all. Advocating for an unsafe learning environment, I guess like Socrates. All right, I don't want to drink any hemlock.
Right.
And microaggressions. So the whole social justice lexicon of sins they invoked to throw at me. And they used references to some of my online writings, deliberately confusing
That's so unfair.
some of the things. Well, yes, indeed. All right. So again, the dean sends me this letter and informs me he's going to order that review. He didn't talk to me first.
Did any of your colleagues talk to you first? I
No.
mean, that's such a treacherous thing to do without even discussing it with you
Well,
professionally.
yeah. I mean, a number of these people I had considered friends, but to date, here it is all these months later, I've yet to hear from a single colleague, indeed at NYU overall. Although the guy who runs Mercer Books told me the other day that I had a lot more support than I realized. But in this climate, I guess people are actually afraid to communicate with me, which is really shocking. There's one colleague who did come to my defense, and this is an untenured member of the faculty. It shows considerable character, seems to me, on her part.
Yeah, but the fact that there's one
One
faculty
huge faculty,
and that people united to cite your First Amendment protected writings outside of the classroom as microaggressions and hate speech is extraordinarily distressing, especially because academic freedom covers you can't harass students, you can't verbally abuse students, but academic freedom means you can say things that are extremely unpopular.
Well, yes.
And encourage other students to say things that other students find extremely unpopular if it's in the process of learning something. So this is heartbreaking. Then what happened?
Well, they asked for this review. He informed me he was going to do it. I wrote to the provost, who's rational, and I said, what do I do? And she said, I think you should ask for a meeting with him. So we met by Zoom, he and a vice dean who was doing the review. And he was very vague. He said that the university's lawyers had told him and the provost that they must order the review. This is interesting because, in fact, legally speaking, as you just said, there's no grounds for this review. And in defense of that claim, I invoked the letter that the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, FIRE, terrific nonprofit in Philadelphia, wrote to NYU's president, Andrew Hamilton. And it's a terrific letter, and it simply spells out point by point that there is no legal grounds for this review, and he should step in and quash it.
Okay, so now what's the status?
He ignored that letter. He ignored it when it went public on their blog. I don't think he or the dean is actually driving this.
So who is behind it?
Well, let me finish telling you what happened, and then we'll speculate about that, because the authors, the signatories of that slanderous letter, I decided I had to sue them for libel, because I sent them all a point-by-point rebuttal, everything they claimed in that letter, which is just a pack of lies, and asked them for a retraction and apology, and they ignored that. I sent a follow-up, and they ignored that too. So I decided I have no choice. I can't take this. I can't let this go. This is grotesque, this is wrong. I mean, my teaching is something I prize easily as much as I do my writings, maybe more.
Yeah.
And I'm pleased to say, I asked for letters of support. I told the dean I was going to do this. Former and current students and people who have visited my classes over the years, and well over 50 have come in. All this stuff is on my website if people want to read it, and they'll see that students find this course a life-changing experience. And
you don't have to preach to the choir. I wrote you a letter of support. I know that you're a great teacher. I cannot imagine that you would
Thank you.
Do anything improper in a classroom except make people think harder.
Right, exactly. Well, all of this illustrates the truth of what I say at the beginning of the course, that this can be hard. Not every student can handle it. Well, it turns out, so I sue them for libel. They found a lawyer, asked for an extension, and then responded with a motion to dismiss. And they just doubled down. They just said, what we said was substantially true. And anyway, we did not make this a public issue. You did by circulating our letter to the dean. Well, no, it was my chair who made this a public issue by speaking for the department on Twitter and saying, we're going to try to get this guy fired.
Shocking.
And their third point was, we didn't mean to get you fired, which was extremely disingenuous.
Very disingenuous. All right. So what, can you fast forward a bit?
Yes, I will. Very quickly. They filed the motion, we responded to it, and then they replied. That's the process. Okay. And so as we speak, the judge in the case is deciding what to do, or maybe has decided what to do. He could either grant the motion, in which case we will appeal.
Right.
He could deny the motion, in which case we'll proceed, or he could ask for oral arguments from the lawyers. Right. So I'm here talking to you, to alert people to this, because it could go one way or the other.
But that's just about your libel suit against your colleagues, but do you get to teach your course? Has the university backed you up? Are you allowed to say what you have to say about masks? And who is the medical advisor? Because this is like the third or fourth time I've heard some unnamed epidemiologist who issues some edict that everyone else complies with in a way that is damaging to a community or to individuals or to free speech. And I really want to get, I want to get that information, because I do see millions of dollars flowing first from the Gates Foundation, now from the federal government to, COVID education, even in universities and community groups and newspapers. So this is some, Nazi nonsense. And we need to figure out who these people are and what this process is. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you just stroll around the campus, you can see enormous glossy ads, posters, and windows of NYU buildings, with big close-ups of, virtuously masked nurses and doctors, masked today so we can have a better tomorrow. I mean, that's propaganda, of course, and it's overwhelming. And NYU, this is a partial answer to your question, is very, very heavily invested.
Pharmaceuticals?
In vaccines. And that means Big Pharma, that means the Gates Foundation. A colleague in another department was picked by Joe Biden as an advisor on COVID. NYU is very deeply implicated in that whole system. And they got rid of Mary Holland, who was a tenured law school professor, who did excellent work on the dangers of certain vaccines. She co-edited a book called Vaccine Epidemic, which is, essential reading. And when nurses, I think this is true, when nurses at the NYU med school sued over the mandate that they had to get flu shots, I believe she represented them, or maybe
I've heard her name.
Them.
So I understand. So basically, NYU is financially implicated in the machine that is suppressing our liberties everywhere. I still want to understand this relationship of this medical advisor, because for that person to intervene between a professor and students and send a letter to students about what happened in a classroom is a dramatic violation of the sacred confidentiality, among other things, and freedom of the classroom, a kind of whole new bio-fascist surveillance, that it's not even, the chain of command isn't now Mark Crispin Miller, students to Mark Crispin Miller, Dr. Miller to his dean to the provost. There's some shadowy medical black shirt overseeing everything and making sure everyone complies.
Well, I believe that's true, and it's sort of hard to name names. I want to make clear that they got rid of Mary Holland. She was a tenured. I'm tenured, of course, and so is she, in the law school. And they squeezed her out last year. She now works with Bobby Kennedy at Children's Health Defense. Right. So it is as if there is a desire for what the Nazis called Gleichschaltung, which means streamlining. They don't want any dissident voices, certainly none with a public profile out there contradicting the official narrative. And I think that that's what's driving this. Now, interestingly, my colleagues, I believe, were motivated by their own long-time discomfiture with what I was doing in the class, or I should say, with what they were told by some few agitated students, what I had allegedly said in class. And again, none of them ever approached me. None of them ever said, what did you say? Did you say this? So I've never heard from any of them. But Naomi, if one goes and looks at the exhibits that they used to bolster their motion to dismiss, it's full of email exchanges they've been having with each other about me for several years.
This is heartbreaking. I mean, even if you're, the most controversial professor on campus, academic freedom is academic freedom. And I'm just thinking back, even you didn't say don't wear a mask, but even if you asked students to think critically about propaganda around mask wearing, I'm just, as a woman and a former female student, thinking back on my years of sitting in on important law school classes, philosophy classes, in which the subject of abortion came up. And people were pro-life, or they were pro-choice, or, articles about the harm done to women by abortion got circulated, articles about, women's right to choose got circulated. I could have easily have said, that's a microaggression. I don't want to hear, you're pushing me to get an abortion, or you're pushing me not to get an abortion. I mean, these are adults, and they are free to make their own, thoughtful decisions. And the fact that now we're in a world in which, if someone tells me what to do with my body or what not to do with my body, they can lose their job. That is that is the end of academic freedom. That's the end of the First Amendment. It's the end of the university. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. What are your final thoughts about what you've gone through? And of course, I always want to bring you back. And, this is an ongoing conversation. I'm sure it's not the end of your battle. Will you get to teach your propaganda course this spring? Are you teaching it?
Well, I'm on medical leave now, so next semester, assuming I'm still a faculty member, I will push to teach the course. And the chair did tell me that I could teach it the next semester, although I don't think he's an independent actor here. Well, first of all, I do want people to go to my GoFundMe page. There is one. They can just do a search on that and my libel lawsuit, my name. They can sign the petition if they like. But I do need people's support because I expect this to be a protracted legal struggle. But more generally, I want to say that this is very troubling, what we're seeing, that long tradition of censorship of intellectuals and activists, dismissing them as conspiracy theorists around the Kennedy assassination, for example. This has been going on for decades. But in the year of COVID, it became really, really oppressive in a way that's, this is not hyperbolic. It's reminiscent of Nazi Germany or the Cultural Revolution.
Absolutely. It's 1933.
Well, yes, because what's happened is that this attack on conspiracy theory, which my colleagues invoked.
Oh God.
Has dovetailed with two other lines of attack against free speech. So if you're a conspiracy theorist, you're a domestic terrorist. If you talk about race or gender in any but the most approved way, you are engaging in hate speech. They accused me of that. It had to do with my views on transgenderism as an ideology.
Right.
And they accused me of putting everybody at risk. So this is COVID. This is biofascism.
Biofascism.
But if you don't say what the WHO says, you're killing grandma, and you should be denied the right to travel or work or live. So all three of those lines of attack were combined in the letter against me. So I pulled a kind of censorship trifecta, which is what makes my case really exemplary, unfortunately.
Sadly, here you are again, but more more sacrificially than ever,
Right.
standing up for liberal values and freedoms of speech in a way that is literally getting you professionally crucified, as you say, on 3 different levels. And I'm really so frightened, at your summation, because it's happened so quickly. It's
Right.
happened in a year that these norms kind of solidified. And ironically, what led it to lock down speech in these 3, very rigorous ways is propaganda.
Exactly.
Massive, multi-million, tracked to a few bad actors, drenching our universities,
Right.
drenching our media, drenching our public figures, leading to, sacrificial moments like yours. May it not be sacrificial for long, but leading to the end of, what makes a liberal democracy, which is the ability to ask questions and to look at evidence and to have open debate. Uh,
Exactly.
Professor Miller, we could go on and on. I hope to have you back whenever you want to update or
Okay.
share the latest. And let me, reiterate the ways that you can, and really you must help Dr. Miller with his battle, because it is expensive, it is arduous. Go to the GoFundMe page, support him. You could also support him by signing up for your newsletter, News
Right.
from Background. Is that correct?
Yes.
Any other locations you want people to go if they want to help you or know what you have to say?
If people want to get my daily emails, either one by one or as a daily digest, they can go to it's markcrispinmiller.com. And the GoFundMe page, I want to make clear that money goes into an escrow account controlled by my lawyer. So I'm not going to go off to St. Bart's on the proceeds.
I quite understand.
And I have significant medical expenses because of my condition. So I'm really trying to focus just on recovering physically. But I cannot imagine doing anything other than what I have done. Because this kind of thing has simply got to stop. And I'm grateful to you for having me on to make that point.
Always, and what an honor to talk to you. And I wish you good health, full recovery, and absolute, not just vindication, but triumph, because you're speaking for all of us.
All
Thank
right,
you so much,
thanks.
Dr. Mark Crispin Miller. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.